Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zvachim Daf Lamed Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Daniel and Sarah Berelowitz in honor of their newest grandchild, Re'em Lior, son of Hadar and Eliyahu Berelowitz. Mazal tov. Okay, reminder that we started the Ta'anit Challenge. It's starting next week, but we started advertising it. So if you saw it, pass it around. If you didn't see it, it's on our homepage, and we'll be sending it out also in other manners today. So if you haven't seen it yet, hopefully you'll see it. And if not, you can write to us and we can send you the details. It's a way to learn Masechet Ta'anit in the time that we're asking for rain, which is the real topic of Masechet Ta'anit. And it's a very nice, sweet Masechet with a lot of stories, Agadatot, and a lot of messages that are ever so presently relevant in our times. Okay. We're going to start now with the Braita. So we saw in the Mishnah, we're going to start with the Braita that starts at the bottom of Lamed Vav Amud Bet. What we started in this chapter, right now we have this Machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, we're going to talk only right now about the sprinkling of the blood that's done on the outer altar, which is the main altar. Most of the regular korbanot are done there. And we're going to basically say that all of these matanot, that if you put one matana, it's enough. But Beit Shammai says, except for the chatat, that needs 2 minimum. Okay? So, and then we had the relevance to Pigul, which is not really our topic for today. So we're going to bring a Braita, which is going to be the source for how do we know that all of the sacrifices that are brought on the outer altar, if you did one sprinkling of blood, that's sufficient. Okay? Very simple. We have a Braita. This is something both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree about, other than the chatat, right? Other than the sin offering. But here you have it, right? Where do we know that if you just did one, it works? Talmud Lamal, v'dam zvachecha yishafech. Okay, we take this pasuk. It's in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 12, verse 27. It says, Asita olotecha habasar v'hadam. You should bring your olot, okay, your burnt offerings, the meat and the blood, al mizbach Hashem Elokecha, on the altar. V'dam zvachecha, and the blood of, sounds like all your sacrifices, yishafech al mizbach Hashem Elokecha, will be poured on the altar. So this sounds like a very general pasuk. The blood will be poured. What do they do with this pasuk? Well, right now, in this Braita, they take this pasuk and they say, oh, it looks like all you really need is the blood to be poured. That could be done in one pouring. Okay? So one is sufficient. So now, we're going to start a slew of questions. And we're going to do this 3 times. Okay? I'm going to bring up the study guide. And we're going to see that this pasuk creates a lot of issues here. Okay, because this drasha on the pasuk, one second, do that right. We're going to do with this pasuk is say, wait a minute, don't we need this drasha for other things? This pasuk, okay, we darshan many other things from this pasuk, okay? So, we're going to see that, you're going to see this chart, Dam zvachecha yishafech. We're going to have 3 other drashot of this pasuk. So now we all know that you can only darshan one thing from each pasuk. So each time we're going to say, the person who wrote our Braita, the author of our Braita, who said the Dam zvachecha yishafech teaches you that nitanim al mizbech hachitzon shenitanam b'matana achat shekipel. Okay, the author of our Braita, what's he going to do with this one? What's he going to do with this one? And what's he going to do with this one? And each time we're going to have a different answer. How is he going to deal with this problem? So, but the real way we're going to ask it is hala hachi yudata. In other words, how can you say that Dam zvachecha yishafech is coming to teach you that as long as you did one placing on the altar, that's enough, when this pasuk is needed for something else? So let's start with the first. So that those words, what, that's coming for this? It's needed for something else. Okay, and each time that's what we're going to do. So now we're going to say, Minayim lechol hadamim, okay, lechiditanya. This is a quote from a Braita. How do you know? Okay, if you see on my study guides, I've said this many times, but I haven't said it in a while, so I'll say it again in case there's any new people. The purple font is, the different font is for specifically psukim from the Torah. The reddish colored font is Tannaitic sources. Okay, you're going to see that all of these are Tannaitic sources, so therefore it's a question on that Tanaitic source, how did you darshan that when other things are needed? And then the regular font is just the words of the Gemara. Minayin l'chol adamim shetunim matan dam liyesod, Talmud Amar, v'dam zvachecha yishafech. Okay, there's only a few times in the Torah. Now, this is a big principle, and we've talked about this a little bit before. We haven't touched on it so much yet, but we had it in the daf, the Shabbat daf on the Shirayim. Okay, daf lamed, what was it, lamed daled. So, what are Shirayim? When you take the blood and you pour it on the altar, you take some of the blood, you pour it on the altar, and whatever is left, you pour on the base of the altar. There's this space where they would pour it. Now, it only says that in certain psukim, particularly by the sin offering, and particularly by the sin offering that the place that everything's done in the inner altar. And it doesn't really say it. And this is a theme all throughout Zvachim that I've gone on about already, and I will mention more and more. And it's particularly blatant in our daf, which is that in Zvachim, a lot of what they're struggling with is the details of korbanot. While they're detailed out as much as you think they're very detailed, there's actually tons of details missing, and some are mentioned only by some sacrifices and not by others. And the big question all the time is, well, is that a model for the others or not? Or is it just in that place? So when it talks about the fact that you pour the blood on the base of the altar, the rest of the blood, it doesn't say that in other places. So now this drasha says, where do we get it from? Dam zvachecha yishafech. This pasuk is a general pasuk about sacrifices. It's talking about pouring the blood on the base of the altar, presumably. Dam zvachecha yishafech. Usually when we talk about lishpoch, we mean to the yesod on the base there. So, dam zvachecha yishafech must mean all the korbanot, you dump the remainder you pour the remainder onto the base of the altar. So, again, back to how can you learn if you do in the outer altar all those sacrifices, as long as you do one, it's enough, when it's needed for a totally different halacha of pouring the remainder on the yesod. To which they answer, the author of our Braita is going to be that first Braita we started with, is going to learn this halacha, this second halacha about the base of the altar in a different way. And not just are we making this up, but Rebbe actually darshans it differently. Okay, and that's on this part of the chart here. So, Ulamemi Pasuk Acher is going to learn from a different Pasuk. Nafkalemi de Rebbe. He gets it out of what Rebbe said. D'Tanya, as Rebbe said in a Braita. Okay, I didn't bring the whole Braita here, but I brought the Pasuk from which they learn it from. Hanish'al badam yimatzeh. Okay, now we're talking about the bird sin offering. By the bird sin offering, it says that you're supposed to hizami dama chatat al kira mizbeach. So you're supposed to sprinkle from the blood of the sin offering on the wall of the altar. V'hanish'ar badam, and whatever's left, yimatzeh el yesod mizbeach chatatu. You're supposed to kind of squeeze out the blood and put it on the yesod. So what does he say here? Now, okay, that's specifically by the bird offering. But we want to get from there to all the offerings. So now they're going to say, She'ein Talmud Lomar Badam. But you didn't need the pasuk Vanishar Badam, whatever's left of the blood. The beginning of the pasuk was already talking about blood. So Nishar Badam is totally unnecessary. So therefore, She'ein Talmud Lomar Badam, that word is extra. Ma Talmud Lomar Badam. Lafisha lo lamanu ela l'nitani matan arba shtunim matam damim liyesod. We only know about the sin offering, which has 4 placings of blood that you need to also, you do it on 4 corners, and then you put it in the base of the altar. Those are the only places, like I said, by the inner offerings, by the ones that go on the inner altar there, you put it on all 4 corners, and there it says you pour it on the yesod. And also, by the way, I think on the regular sin offering, which happens on the outer altar, but the point is, the place that yesod is mentioned is the place where you need 4 placings of the blood. Now, most sacrifices don't need to be placed on all 4 corners. Shar damim minayin. So how do we know all the other damim need these? So they're basically saying, when it has to go on 4 corners, it says you have to pour the remainder on the yesod. But maybe all the others don't need it. Talmud lomar vanish'al badam yimatzeh. She'ein Talmud lomar badam. Now they're just repeating. You didn't really need the word bidam. Uma Talmud lomar badam. So bidam is viewed as a very general word, any blood. So here it's talking about pour the remainder on the yesod, or really here it's squeezing it, but it doesn't matter. It's getting it on the Yesod. From there, we learn to all the other sacrifices that we do it, and that's very simple then. Dam Zbechecha Yishafech teaches you Nitanim that you did one is sufficient. You already got your atonement. And Nishar Badam, that word Badam, by the Chatat HaOf, that one's going to teach you about all the other offerings. Okay, solve question number 1. Question number 2, it's going to be introduced in the exact same manner. Va'akate lahachi uda'ata. Again, you're going to say Dam Zbechecha Yishafech is coming to teach you what you think it's teaching you. Mibayle l'chidetanya. We need it for the following braita, a different halacha. Minayin. Now, one thing we have to understand here, and I'm always struggling when I translate the word zrika, because what exactly is zrika? We call it sprinkling. That's the general translation. But the blood on the altar goes in all different ways. Some is poured, some is sprinkled, some is thrown. Really, zrika is to throw. Okay, sprinkle is not exactly the best term for it. The way they did the usual zrika, okay, there's lahazot, okay, that's to really sprinkle, like we do that on Yom Kippur. When the Kohen sprinkles the blood, right, he kind of takes it and throws it toward the parochet or on the parochet. Big debate about that. But anyway, there's different methods of doing it. Today, we're going to talk about in this sugya is zrika and shvicha. So both are done from a kli, okay? There's other times where there's placing, like the Kohen dips his finger in the blood and puts it on the 4 corners, okay? That's another method. So there's all different methods. Now there's zrika and shvicha we're going to talk about right now. Shvicha is to pour, like pouring a pitcher. That's how you imagine it. Zrika is, it's in the sanctified vessel, the kli sharet, like a bowl, and you throw it toward the altar, okay? You just kind of, with a twist of your wrist, you throw it upward toward the altar, either to the bottom part or the top part, depending on, right, which kind of sacrifice it is, as we discussed, and that's zrika. So now the question is, what if you were supposed to do zrika and you did shvicha, right? Each korban has its own method that you're supposed to use. Or you're supposed to do shvicha and you did zrika. So here our drasha tells us, Minayim lenitanim bizrika, if you're supposed to do zrika, shenetanam b'shvicha, but you actually poured it instead of throwing it, yatsa, you fulfilled your obligation. How do we know? Talmud Lomar. Here you have it. The blood of your korbanot can be poured. Any korban can really be poured. In other words, even if it's supposed to be zrika, if you did it by pouring, it works. So now we're stuck again, because we have a different drasha. You can't learn both from the same pasuk. To which they're going to answer, don't worry about that braita, because the author of our braita, Savar la Rabbi Akiva, Da'amar lo zrika b'chlal shvicha v'lo shvicha b'chlal zrika. Our author of our braita holds like Rabbi Akiva, doesn't hold by this drasha. Thinks that if you're supposed to do zrika and you did shvicha, it doesn't work. And likewise, if you're supposed to do shvicha and you did zrika, it doesn't work either. Now, nobody thinks that if you're supposed to pour, that throwing is included in pouring. But there is an opinion, which is the opinion of the braita we just quoted, which thinks that the obligation to throw it would be included in pouring it. In other words, pouring includes sprinkling, okay? The word, right, or the action of pouring includes pouring or sprinkling, but the action of sprinkling or throwing, okay, does not include pouring. How do we know there's a machloket about this? What we're now going to show is machloket Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael is grade because we're going to go back to him. It's highlighted because we're going to go back to him in a bit. But it's not highlighted for right now. It's not important for our purposes. But now we're going to say Ditnan. There's a Mishnah that shows this machloket Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and basically it's going to split like this. Rabbi Ishmael is the author, or at least coincides with the opinion in the braita we just quoted, that if you're supposed to do zrika and you did shvicha, you poured it instead of throwing it, it works. Okay? Rabbi Akiva is going to disagree, and that matches our braita that doesn't use dam zvachecha to teach this halacha because he doesn't believe in this halacha. Okay, so I just want to show you methodologically, we had 2 methods of dealing with this problem. Doesn't the pasuk teach you this? No, right? So last time we said, oh no, you can learn that same halacha from a different pasuk. This time we say, he just doesn't learn that halacha at all. And to prove it, we can see there's a machloket. So once you know there's a machloket about this issue and not everyone agrees with it, it's very easy to say, oh, the author of our braita must side with Rabbi Akiva. So let's see the Mishnah. Ditnan. Now, you need a little background for this Mishnah. On Pesach, okay, you bring the Korban Pesach. On Yudalid, on, Erev Pesach, you sacrifice the Pesach. And then we have, then you do also, okay, they would bring Shalmei Chagiga. They would bring the Chagiga Korbanot. Why would they bring them? They would bring them because of the following thing. You have to eat the Korban Pesach, what we say, al hasova. You have to be satiated. Now, if you have a Korban and you have a lot of people who are registered for your Korban and everyone gets a piece of the meat, right? Everyone has to eat a kazayit, but a kazayit is not satiating. So what if there's not enough meat to go around? And for people to actually be satiated. So what they would do is they would sacrifice these other shlamim. Shlamim are korbanot that you can actually eat, right? And the owners eat. So they would sacrifice shlamim for the holiday so that they could have more to eat. Now, the first thing you have to know is that the shlamim, you do zrika. Pesach, you do shfichat damim. You pour the blood. So now the question is, and now it's a different issue. Okay, one more thing you need to know. There's blessings you would make on eating the meat of the sacrifice. So Rashi quotes it on the Pesach in the Dibor Matchil Berach Berkat Pesach. I'm skipping the first few lines. Ala Pesach Omer Baruch Asher Kasham Tzav Tzivanu leEchol HaPesach. And on the Zevach, which is on the Shalmei Chagiga, you would say Asher Kasham Tzav Tzivanu leEchol et HaZevach. Now the question is, Ditzna Berach Berkat Pesach. What if you are about to eat both and you made the bracha on the Pesach? Patar et shel zevach. Et shel zevach lo patar et ha-Pesach, divrei Rabbi Yishmael. And this is all connected to, so if you do the Pesach one, it exempts you from the zevach. You don't need to say the bracha on that. But if you made the bracha on the zevach, it doesn't exempt you from the Pesach. Why is that? Because you do the Pesach b'shvicha, since the zevach is done b'zrika, but zrika could be fulfilled through shvichat damim. So therefore, okay, there's this association that the bracha is talking about really also the sprinkling of the blood or the pouring of the blood. And since Pesach is associated with pouring, and the zevach theoretically could be poured, so your bracha on the Pesach can include the zevach. But if you make the bracha on the zevach, then that's not going to include the Pesach because the zevach is done b'zrika and you can't do the Pesach b'zrika. So therefore, right, you can't throw the blood, it won't work. Because what did we say? Shvicha is not included in zrika, right? The obligation of Zrika doesn't cover your obligation of Shvicha, and that's Rabbi Yishmael, and that matches perfectly with what the Braita said here. But comes Rabbi Akiva and he disagrees. Rabbi Akiva Omer, lozo poteret zo v'lozo poteret zo. Neither can exempt the other, because if you have to do Zrika, you have to do Zrika. You have to do Shvicha, you have to do Shvicha. You can't say, oh, I did Shvicha for Zrika, that's going to work. So that's very simple now. The author of our Braita doesn't have this drasha at all because he just doesn't agree with Rabbi Akiva. I'm sorry, he agrees with Rabbi Akiva. He doesn't agree with Rabbi Yishmael. So we could just erase this Braita for the purposes of our Braita. Now we're not erasing it. It's Rabbi Yishmael's position, but it's not a difficulty on the author of our Braita because we could simply say he holds like Rabbi Akiva. Okay, we've got one more left here. Next question. Akate, but still, lahach yuda'ata, it's coming to teach you that if you write all the blood you're supposed to sprinkle, any blood on the outer altar, if you did one, it atones for you. Mibayle lachidetanya, we need, and it's learned from Dams Vachacha Yishafech. We don't have a problem with the drasha, we have a problem with which words he learned it from. Dams Vachacha Yishafech is needed for something else. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, again Rabbi Yishmael, and he says, Ach bechor shor, bechor kesev, or bechor ez. Now we're moving to a different topic completely. This is a pasuk that talks about the firstborn. The firstborn animal, all your firstborn animals, you have to bring to the temple and sacrifice. If they, and then when you sacrifice them, the meat gets eaten by the Kohen. So now it says, Ach bechor shor, bechor kesev, or bechor ez, lo tifdeh kodeshem. You can't redeem them, they're sanctified. Et amam tizrok al mizbeach, you have to sprinkle their blood on the altar or throw it on the altar. Et chelbam taktir, you have to burn the parts on the altar. Okay, this is like by every korban, right? You have to do put the blood on the altar. You have to burn the imurim; those are the innards, right? Certain parts of the fats and the all that stuff on the mizbeach. Ishel l'reach nichach la'Hashem. And then I'll just read the next pasuk because we're going to get to this later. Ubisaram yelechan, their meat will be for you. Who's you? The Kohanim. Just like they give the other parts of other korbanot to the kohanim, also the meat of this will be for the kohen. L'cha yiyeh. There's a bit of repetition here because it started with yeh l'cha and then l'cha yiyeh. Okay, we'll get back to that after. Now, this pasuk seems very clearly to be talking about bechor only. So, okay, that's pretty obvious, but we'll see in a minute it's not. But anyway, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, mitoch shene'emar ach bechor shor, bechor kesev, or bechor ez, lamadet lebechor shete'um matan damim v'imurim legabei mizbeach. So one of the things we learned in that pasuk is that the bechor needs, right, blood and imurim. You have to sprinkle the blood on the altar, and the imurim get burnt on the altar. Maseru Pesach minayin. Now here's another thing missing in the text, even though it's kind of obvious to us and intuitive that every sacrifice needs blood on the altar and imurim, those innards get burnt on the altar, but it doesn't say so in two places. In other words, every time it brings a korban, it says, and the chaylev gets burned, and the blood goes on the altar, right, gets sprinkled, poured, whatever word is used. But by Maser and Pesach, it's missing. So how do we know, minayin? How do we know that the blood gets poured and the imurim get burned? Now you'll see this only proves really part of it. V'dam zbachecha yishafech. Because it says the blood of your sacrifices gets poured. From there, that must include the ones that it doesn't say anything by. Maser and Pesach. Now it really only helps you with the damim. It doesn't really help you with the imurim. That's not our issue right now. So there you have it. Dam zbachecha yishafech is teaching you something else. So how are you going to deal with that? So this one we're going to deal with in a similar way. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the same way we just did the other one. He doesn't hold this. He doesn't hold by this drasha. Now he does think Maser and Pesach need blood, but he holds like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who learns it from a different way, in a different manner. De'tanya, as it says in the Braita. Rabbi Yossi Aglili omer, damo lo ne'emar ela damam, chelbo ne'emar ela chelbam. The pasuk we just read about Bechor said, their blood is poured on the altar, not its blood. Their fats are burnt on the altar, not its fat. Now, theoretically, we're talking about Bechor. It's singular, firstborn. Why does it say it in plural? It must be teaching you about Maser and Pesach. So basically what we're going to say is, the psukim about Bechor also include, because they're mentioned in plural form, other korbanot. Which would those be? So obviously it's going to be the ones that doesn't say so anywhere else, Maser and Pesach. Also, by the way, we're going to see this many, many times throughout Kodshim. Bechor, Maser, and Pesach are a threesome because they're all kind of similar in a bunch of ways. We won't get into it now, but they're all they're very similar and they're lumped together often. So it's not so crazy to say the Bechor pasuk includes them, even though obviously the simple reading is it's only talking about Bechor. Okay, the next chart on the page you're going to see is a whole back and forth between them. If it's only talking about Bechor, or if it's talking about all of them, we're going to raise all sorts of questions with the psukim. But before we get there, we have one other thing to do. So right now, just to review, we did Dam Zvachecha Yishafech is teaching us our drasha, what it says in our Mishnah. Then we said, but wait, Dam Zvachecha Yishafech teaches us 3 other halachot. What is the author of our bride to do with those? Either learns that halacha somewhere else, from some other pasuk, or hold by a different Tannaitic opinion and not by the one in that Braita. Okay, that was our resolution. By the way, the Rabbi Yossi Aglili one, the last one, kind of is similar to both, because on the one hand it's saying he doesn't hold by that Tana, he holds by a different Tana, but it's also that other Tana also is explaining it from a different pasuk. So it's actually more similar to the beginning one about Rabbi, right? He holds it, he learns it from a different pasuk like someone else, as opposed to he doesn't hold that way at all, which was the middle one. So it's actually more similar to the first one. Now the Gemara is going to ask a question. This is why I bolded Rabbi Yishmael, so you see it loud and clear. Now we're just going to look at this chart and say, wait, there's something that doesn't make sense now. We don't have a question anymore on the author of our Braita, but Rabbi Yishmael, Haikra mapikle lahachi umapikle lahachi. According to Rabbi Yishmael now, if you look at the chart, Rabbi Yishmael agreed with Braita, right, with the third one on this chart. Nitanim is rikasha, nitanam b'shvicha yatsa, and that's learned from Dam Zvachecha Yishafech. And the fourth one is also Rabbi Yishmael, Ma'aseru Pesach, Ni matan damim and imurim l'gabei mizbech, is learned from Dam Zvachecha Yishafech. So if we look at this and say, wait, Rabbi Yishmael darshans 2 things. Okay, we're no longer caring about our, right, this is a side question. How could Rabbi Yishmael take 2 things out of that pasuk? To which they answer, Trei Tanai Aliba de Rabbi Yishmael. There's two Tanaic opinions about what Rabbi Yishmael held. Did he hold this one or did he hold this one? Okay, so there's a debate about it among Tanaim, and that's why one source goes with one and one source goes with the other, and that's how we resolve that problem. Okay, now we're going to go to this next chart on the page, which is going to basically go through a bunch of psukim about in the Bechor section, and say that some make sense according to Rabbi Yishmael, and then we have to respond, how does Rabbi Yossi HaGlili going to do it, and some actually the reverse. So we're going to start with a Bishlama le Rabbi Yishmael. Bishlama means this makes sense. Bishlama le Rabbi Yishmael demoke le kule bebechor. The fact that Rabbi Yishmael says this is only talking about Bechor, this next pasuk we're going to quote, fits much better with him. Hainu dichtiv ubesaram yelecha. That second pasuk we quoted there, Pamidbar Yudchet, says, and their meat should go to you. Now their meat means all the meat of the Bechorim, okay, from all different kinds of firstborns you have. What is Besaram Yelecha, right, goes to the Kohen. So, okay, Besaram Yelecha goes to the Kohen. We got that. Okay, now what meat goes to the Kohen? Only Bechor, not Maser and Pesach, they're eaten by the owners. So that really makes perfect sense according to Rabbi Yishmael, but makes no sense according to Rabbi Yossi. El Rabbi Yossi, if he says, Demoke le'nami Maser Pesach, he says this applies to Maser and Pesach as well. Maseru Pesach ba'alim achlele umayu b'saram yelecha. So what is b'saram yelecha referring to? So the answer, echad tam ve'echad ba'almum. Limed al b'chor ba'almum shenitan lekohen. Shalom atzinu lo b'chol ha'torah kula. Okay, there's a very famous and known halacha by a b'chor ba'almum. Okay, we're going to talk about this. We'll see a lot about this in the Masechet Bechorot that we'll get to soon. But what this is saying is the plural Besaram is not talking about the other things that are referenced in this pasuk, even though they're not written explicitly, but according to Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, they're there, Maaser and Pesach. No. It's talking about a Bechor Ba'almum and a Bechor Tam. Two types of Bechors. One is unblemished. That gets sacrificed, and then the meat goes to the Kohen. What if it's blemished? What happens to it? So if it's blemished, now generally when you have an animal that's blemished, what do? You sell it and bring in its place, you bring it, you wait till it gets or whatever. Let's say it has a blemish. You sell the animal, you take the money, you buy another animal, and you bring it instead. So if I decide I want to bring a voluntary offering, and I designate an animal, and then it gets a blemish, that's what I'll do. I'll sell it, right? And then I'll take the money, go buy a new one. Bechor is different. Okay, what do I do with it? If it has a mum, we can eat it. Now, I can't eat it myself, though. Bisaram yelecha, what happens to it? I have to bring it to a Kohen. And the Kohen gets to eat it without having to sacrifice it, because you can't sacrifice it. Okay? And it doesn't get redeemed. Okay? That's a key thing. Normally, a Balmum gets redeemed and sacrificed. This one doesn't. This one you can eat. Okay? So now, let's just read those words again. Okay, we're at the bottom of Amud Aleph, top of Amud Bet. Echad tam ve'echad ba'almum. The bisaram in rabim, in plural, is including not all different kinds of meat of bechorim that go to the Kohen, like Rabbi Yishmael said, and it's not including Maser and Pesach, because they don't go to, right, that would have been more intuitive according to Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, but they don't go to the Kohen. What it means is, limed al bechor ba'almum shenitan lekohen. What it's trying to say is, if your bechor animal gets blemished, you just give it to the Kohen. Obviously, the Kohen doesn't sacrifice. The Kohen could just slaughter it and eat it. Now, shalom atzinu lo b'chol ha'torah kula. Now, this is a very basic halacha by Bechor, but they're telling you this actually never appears explicitly in the Torah. This must be learned from those words, b'saram yelecha. Rabbi Yishmael, nafka. What's the problem? If it doesn't say so in the Torah, where's Rabbi Yishmael going to get that from? If b'saram yelecha is talking to him about kol minei becholim, right? He doesn't. So where's he going to learn it from? If you remember when I read that pasuk, I told you it said yeh lecha, and then it says lecha yeh. So lecha yeh teaches you about a bechor ba'almum that it's given to the Kohen. Bishlama. Now we're on the second question. Bishlama le Rabbi Yossi HaGlili demoke le'nami maser Pesach. Okay, before we started with Rabbi Yishmael, makes a lot of sense about this. Now we're going to say something makes a lot of sense, much more so according to Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. Hainu dichtiv lo tifdeh kodeshem. Don't redeem them; they're sanctified. What is that? Now, from there we learn this halacha: krevim ve'ein tmuratam kreva. Now, remember, Rabbi Yossi HaGlili teaches you that the psukim are talking about or he holds. The Pesukim we're talking about Bechor, Maaser, and Pesach. Now there's a halacha by Bechor, Maaser, and Pesach that, okay, let's go back for a minute, zoom out. Tmura. What is Tmura? Tmura is when I have an animal and I designated it for sacrifice, or in this case, it could be a Bechor. It was born as the firstborn. And then I say, instead of bringing that to the altar, I'm going to switch it for something else. Or I took an animal for my Korban Pesach and I swapped it with something else. Now, generally, let's say it was a regular Korban Shlamim and I swapped the animal. What do we say? Hu utmurato yeh kodesh. Okay, they're both sanctified. Both the one that you tried to swap it with, you can't swap out Kedusha, and the new one that you swapped in. They're both sanctified. And what do? Well, the first one, original one, gets brought as a sacrifice. The second one gets sacrificed in the same way the first one was supposed to. Okay, so if it's a shlamim, it's brought as a shlamim. If it was an ola, it's brought as an ola, and the whole thing is burnt on the altar. That's the general halacha with Tmura. By Bechor, Maaser, and Pesach, there's a special halacha. Heim krevim ve'ein tmuratam kreva. They are brought on the altar, but you don't actually sacrifice them on the altar. So what do? You have to wait until they get a blemish, and then you can redeem them, okay? But they themselves are not brought on the altar. That's the halacha here. So that is learned, lo tifdeh. You don't redeem them, okay? You wait till they get a mum, but you can't redeem them, meaning you don't bring, well, what they're going to learn is, lo tifdeh ki kodesh heim, heim krevim ve'ein tmuratam kreva. You learn from here that kodesh heim, okay, means these are sanctified, but not their tmura, okay? They're not brought on the altar. Now, they're kodesh, not the others. Ditnan. Now, how do we know this halacha? And how do we know it exists by all these? So, tmurat bechor u'maaser, hein uvladan uvlav vladan ad sof kol ha'olam harein bechor u'maaser. Okay, the tmura of bechor and their vladot, anything that's born from the tmura, okay, if you take a different animal and it's dead and then they have offspring, okay, all of them are like bechor u'maaser, meaning they have their sanctity, but you don't sacrifice them, so you have to wait till they get a mum, and now you're going to see what you do with them when they get blemished. Yachlu b'muman leba'alim. Once they're blemished, their owners can eat them. They can just sacrifice them. Okay, you don't. That's why it says lo tifdeh. Don't redeem them, and that halacha applies to all three. And according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it's learned from these words very simply. Utnan. Okay, that by the way was just by Bechor Maaser. How do we know it's true for Pesach? Well, there's a Mishnah that says, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Shamati shetmurat Pesach kreva. Utmurat Pesach ena kreva ve'en li lefaresh. He says this very strange thing. He says, I have a tradition. I learned this, but I can't explain it. Sometimes the Tmura Pesach is sacrificed, sometimes it's not, and I don't really understand it. Like, I don't know when it is, when it's not. Anyway, the point being for our purposes, although I promise by the end of today's daf you'll know what that means, but the point of this line right now is Tmurat Pesach, sometimes at least, is not sacrificed. And those three, we now have Bechor, Maaser, and Pesach, their Tmura is not sacrificed, and we learn that from the words Lo Tifdeh Ki Kodesh Heim. Ella le Rabbi Yishmael demoke le kule bebechor, but according to Rabbi Yishmael, who learns that this pasuk is only for Bechor, so now we have a question: where are you going to learn Maaser and Pesach for this halacha? So Maaser and Pesach de lo krevat muratan min nale. So basically, we're going to say that Rabbi Yishmael takes that pasuk to say that pasuk is about Bechor, to say Bechor is sacrificed but not their tmura. But what about Maaser? What about Pesach? So basically, we're going to have to answer that Rabbi Yishmael learns them from a completely different way. Maaser. Gamar avara avarami bechor. We have a gzera shava from maaser to bechor, and this is a gzera shava that's used for many things. It says by maaser, kol asher ya'avor tachat hashevet. That's when, right, you walk the animals out of the pen, and they walk one by one under the shevet. They're over. Okay, that's where we get the imagery from Netana Tokef, that we're like sheep passing by God's stick. And then by Bechor, it says, Va'avarta kol peterechem, pass every firstborn. So you have Avara Avarami Bechor. So once we have it for Bechor, we learn it from there. Pesach behedya katav be. Pesach is said in its own place. It's not exactly in Korban Pesach, you're going to see, but there's a pasuk that says, Kesef. Matam alomer in Kesef. Okay, this is a pasuk about shlamim. It says about shlamim, if you're going to bring it from a Kesef, which is in the sheep family. So it says, Im kesef. It could have just said kesef. Okay, the pasuk is, let's just read it inside. Im kesef hu makriv et korbanot. If you're going to bring it from a kesef, v'ikriv oto lifnei Hashem, then you bring it v'ikriv oto lifnei Hashem, you bring it before God. It just could have said, you bring a kesef, this is what you do. Why does it say in kesef? L'rabot murat ha-pesach achar ha-pesach shetikrav shlamim. Well, since it's talking about a shlamim, this is teaching you. Now, kesef is always a reference really to Pesach because it's brought from kvasim and izim, right? The Pesach can be brought from that sheep family. So, they say here, this is teaching you that there's a tmurat Pesach. If you do a tmura, you replace your Pesach animal with a different one, and now it's after Pesach, shetikrav shlamim. If Pesach passed already, and your tmura, right now, your Pesach is already done, so your tmura could actually be brought as a shlamim. And that's what this Pesach is trying to teach you, that there's a way to bring a kesev that was once a Pesach, or a tmura Pesach, could be brought as a shlamim. Yachol af lifnei Pesach ken. You might have thought even before Pesach you could sacrifice it. Talmud lomar hu. Im kesev hu makriv. Hu is a word that usually says just this. So now we're going to say only if it's after Pesach, not if it's before Pesach. If it's before Pesach, it can't be sacrificed, and that was what we were looking for. Ein tmor tan kreva. Now, through learning this, we already understand now what Rabbi Yoshua said. Sometimes the tmor is sacrificed, sometimes it's not, which is if it's after Pesach, then you can bring it as shlamim. If it's before Pesach, you can't sacrifice it. So now, anyway, that's not important to us. What's important to us is we found a source for Rabbi Yishmael. If he's not going to learn from the pasuk about Bechor, he's going to learn it from this other pasuk. Okay, that's where he learns Pesach, and Maaser is learned from Gzeira Shava to Bechor. It's just not in the Bechor pasuk itself, but it's learned from Gzeira Shava. Okay, so now we resolved that whole thing. So just to review what we did so far, so you understand our structure, we started with, we had a Braita with the drasha. Dams v'checha yishapech teaches us the halacha in our Mishnah, that if you did one matana on all the things that go on the outer altar, your atonement is fine. Even though many of them need more than one, but one is sufficient and you fulfilled your obligation. Then we said, but what about all these other psukim? Okay, there's a drashot, other drashot, and we answered each one. The third one mentioned this machloket Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, which led us to two questions, or two issues, two general things. The first was, Rabbi Yishmael, based on what we learned in this first chart, seems to learn two things from the psukim, the same pasuk. How can he do that? And that was just kind of a side thing. And we answered that it's two different approaches as to what Rabbi Yishmael actually held. Then, since we talked about this machloket, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, we went in depth into that and said, wait, we have a few questions on each of them. Okay, and went through how does each one understand these things based on their difference of opinion about whether the Bechor pasuk is only about Bechor or it's also including Maaser and Pesach. That was a total tangent. Now we're back to our topic. And now we have a different question. If we look back at this chart, Jams v'checha yishafech, we have 4 different drashot from it. Our main focus of the daf so far was we're reading the Gemara through the prism of our author of the Braita, who basically took those words to teach the halacha in our Mishnah. But now we're going to have a different question, which is, assuming we all agree about the halacha in our Mishnah, there didn't seem to be disagreement about it, now we're going to focus on all the other Braitot. Kol hanak t'nai demafkele lahai dams v'checha yishafech lidrasha achrina, all these other 3 drashot, that each Braita learns something else from the word dams v'checha yishafech. So, where are they going to get the halacha in our Mishnah? Okay? Because they can't learn it from Dams v'checha yishafech because they use it for something else. So where are they going to learn the halacha that as long as you did one matana, it's sufficient? To which we're going to answer, Savrei lehu kebeit Hillel. The first thing is we're going to say they hold like Beit Hillel, that in a korban chatat, in a sin offering, one is sufficient as well. De'amrei av chatat shenetana matana kiper. That's Beit Hillel. V'yalfei kulu mechatat. So we're going to basically say, once you learn, now we don't know how Beit Hillel gets there, that's going to be the next section. Once you learn that for the chatat, one is sufficient, then that will build the model for all the others. So we now have 2 ways to learn this. Either, dams v'checha yishafech, sounds like, as long as it's poured on the altar, we don't care how many times, you've already achieved your atonement, and that's what that pasuk is teaching. Or, you say that the chatat, which we don't yet know how, but we're going to see that in a minute, the chatat, one is sufficient, and since one is sufficient for the chatat, we're going to be able to learn from there. That will be the paradigm to teach from there to all the other sacrifices. Okay, that's our approach. So now we're going to go to this Machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. So now we're going to say, Chatat shte matanot, Amar Rav Huna, my taima de Beit Shammai. Where does Beit Shammai get this from? And now we're going to talk about in the Psukim, okay, we're now in chapter 4 of Vayikra, where it talks about Korbanot Chatat. And there it says, Kranot, you put the blood on the corners of the altar. And it says Kranot 3 times in chapter 4. And we're going to see, okay, 2 times it says it without a Vav, 1 time it says it with a Vav. So we're going to have one of these kind of drashot about you darshan with the Vav, without the Vav, because it's plural, but if it's written without the Vav, it actually looks like singular. If you write Kranot without a Vav, and you were to read it the way it's written, the way it looks like it's written, it would be Kranat, which means 1, and not Kranot, which is plural. So Beit Shammai is going to say like this. Okay, Amar Rav Huna, my time at the Beit Shammai. Rav Huna explains his reasoning. Kranot, 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 Harekan Shesh. So if you go by the way it's read, which is plural, plural, plural each time, you get to 6, because each plural is 2, that gets you to 6. So what do we do with 6? Arba lemitzvah, well, there's only 4 Kranot, right? So it's not 6 placements. So 4 means that's the ideal, put on all 4 altars, on all 4 corners of the altar, sorry. Ushtayim la'akev. And 2 are to say 2 are necessary. In other words, you have another 2 left over. What do you do with that? Well, of those 4, 2 have to happen. Beit Hillel have a different drasha. Kranot, kanat, kanat, kanot. They say no, but it's written without a vav. We don't go by how it's read. We go by how it's written. Singular, singular, plural. So 1, 1, and another 2. That's 4. Harekan arba. Shalosh lemitzvah ve'echad la'akev. If you have 4, now this is a totally different way of doing it. You're going to say 3 of those are ideally put on 3. The 4th one is critical. In other words, 1 has to happen, and the other 3, great if they do, but not necessary. And that's our drasha. That's what we were looking for, right? But now the Gemara asks on that, why don't you just say, ideally do 4, and zeu, that's it. You don't have to do any one of them. That's obviously ridiculous, because if you've learned anything in Zvachim, okay, in our 36 Dapim, it's the kapara b'chdi lo eshkachan. There is no atonement without the blood being sprinkled on the altar. It's one of the key elements of any sacrifice. If you don't do the blood, there's no sacrifice. So basically, you can't say all of it's ideal, but if you don't do any, it's okay. And that's why he's going to say shalosh lemitzvah ve'echad la'akev. Or, ibait ema, alternatively, a different explanation of Beit Hillel is going to be more in the approach of Beit Shammai, which you'll see in a minute, like the type of way he does it. Ahane mikra ba'ahane masoret. Okay, now he's going to say like this. We're pulled in 2 directions. If you read it in plural form, right, you read it the way it's supposed to be read, that's mikra. You have plural, 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 you get to 6. But if you read it the way the Masoret has it, which is the way it's written without the vavs, you're going to get to 4. So ahane mikra litfuy echada, v'ahane masoret lebitzur echada. So the mikra, the way it's written, is going to add 1. Mikra, the way it's read is going to add 1. The way it's written is going to take 1 away. So basically, if you have, you're going to have 6 and 4. That gives you, what's the average? 5. So we get to 5. Now here's where it's similar to Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai said there's 6, 4 limits v'shtayim la'akev. Beit Hillel is going to say there's 5, 4 limits for 1 la'akev. And that's a different way of getting to how we know it's ma'akev. Now we're going to end with a whole question on this. If we're going to go with this approach, that if you take a combo, that Rabbi Akiva is saying a combo of Mikra, Masoret, the way it's read and the way it's written, then you're going to get to mistaken conclusions about a bunch of things. Like, for example, Elameata totefet litotafot harekan arba. When it comes to tefillin, it says it without a vav, without a vav, with a vav. There's a bit of a problem. All the places in the Torah say it without a vav. So there's a whole discussion about that, but I'm going to leave that issue aside. We've actually discussed this before. Harekan arba. Now, if you go with our approach, if you really take it the way their text had it, which is with a vav at the end, or according to Rabbeinu Tam, we move the vav from earlier in the word and stick it at the end of the word. That's one approach to doing it. A lot of the commentaries try to fix this drasha and fit it into the text that we have in front of us. Anyway, that's an aside. Harekan arba, so it's 4 the way it's written, 6 the way it's read. Ahane krav, ahane masoret. Chamisha bate ba'elamei abad. Right? We usually learn litotafot 2 chaser, 1 malay, that gives you 4. That's why we have 4 batim in the tefillin. But if you go with this approach, Hani Kran, Hani Masoret, you're going to have 5 because it's theoretically 6 or 4 end up with 5. We don't have 5 batim. So the answer, Seva like Rabbi Akiva, he must hold like Rabbi Akiva, Da'amar, Tat bekat ve'shtayim, Tat pat ve'afriki shtayim. Totafot is actually made from 2 words from a different language, 2 different languages. Tat means 2 in a different language, Pat means 2 in another language, and that gets you to 4, and we don't learn it from the drasha at all. That's the response. And Elameata, then we're going to ask a question on Sukkot. I'm actually going to end here, and we'll finish this up. We'll start this tomorrow. B'Sukkot, we're going to have the same problem, which is there. That's how we learn the number of sides, walls of a sukkah that you need, which is 3. And here it's going to get you to 5, because again, it's missing B'Sukkot. It's missing 2 vavs, has 1 vav, and that would get you to 5. So we'll go back, start with that in tomorrow's daf. So what we did today was pretty straightforward. We had a drasha for the halacha in our Mishnah, and then we said, but wait, that appears used for many other things. Each time we answered it, then we said Rabbi Ishmael seems to use both, right? 2 psukim to teach something completely different, right? Those 2 psukim. And then we said the people who don't have that drasha, what do they do with, right? Where did they learn our halacha from? And that we said from the chatat. And then we got into the chatat. Where do we know the chatat from? And that was from this drasha of Beit Hillel, which we had 2 possible ways of seeing the drasha of Beit Hillel, of where chatat we know that 1 is sufficient. We had 2 ways to learn that. And with that, and then we had that whole aside about the Bechor and the Maaser and all that, which was just a total tangent from within one of the drashot that we had seen. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and Shnishma B'Sorot Tovot.